Good morning, everyone. We will have our presentation, which will be comprised of three sections. We will have our presentation, then a 15-minute break, and then a 20-minute Q&A. We kindly ask you to please send us your succinct questions after using Google Translate in order for us to read them either in English or Spanish. General Taylor, you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to take a moment to introduce Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Wolf to you all. We requested this presentation because of four things. First, tragically, the number of suicides is significantly increasing due to circumstances associated with isolation, with social distancing, and anxiety and stress, and loss of employment related to the impact of this global pandemic. Now, this has not received a lot of attention in the media, thankfully, because I think that this would cause more problems than it would repair. But it is in the official reporting, and it's something for which we need to keep a watchful eye in our families, and also with those with whom we are in virtual contact. The second reason is the concerns that many of you have shared with us about the challenges that you are facing in your families since you've been under the no travel and the stay-in-place restrictions and have your children at home with you. The third is that this isolation, this social distancing, and this stay-at-home status is going to be in effect for at least 30 more days. And fourth, next week is spring break, and you're going to be further out of contact with the college for around 9 days. So we requested this training to give you the tools to assist you with all of the challenges that you are facing. Now, an administrative note, after about a half an hour, we will pause for a few minutes and switch interpreters, and then we will resume. So please bear with us when we do this short pause. Now, some of you have asked why it is a chaplain that is giving this training. Well, the answer to that question is that in our system in the United States, chaplains do far more than ensuring that individuals have the opportunity to worship. They are responsible for ethics, for human rights, for morale, for family life, and for resiliency. And our speaker today is very experienced in the area that we have asked him to present. But training like this just does not happen just by chance. It takes a team to put this together, and we're broadcasting this training throughout the hemisphere. Our students, our staff, delegates from the Inter-American Defense Board, the OAS, and alumni are participating with us today, and we welcome you. Now, I was pleasantly surprised at the level of interest in this presentation. So thank you to our magnificent information technology team and to our world-class interpreters, Freda Garcia, Alvaro Valle, Clara Mejia, Marilia Vincent, and Silvia Lopez, who all came in to do this and provide this training. You all are part of the solution. So with that, let me turn the time over to Chaplain Wolf.
Chaplain Wolf,
Testing.
para probarle, el auditorio está construido.
This auditorium is comprised of 58 students from class 59, staff, and very importantly, our dear family members throughout the American continent. Chaplain Todd Wolf, the floor is now yours.
As he mentioned, I'm Chaplain Wolf, and in the United States Army, we go by chaplain rather than our rank, no matter what rank we are, just so that people know that we're a non-command presence, we're approachable by everyone, and we're there to take care of you no matter what your religious beliefs, and also maintain confidentiality. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to get a practical understanding of how we can deal with the challenges that come our way while we're at home. I mean, I've been at home for the most part of the last 3 weeks. My wife is living in our retirement home near the grandkids in Wyoming. I'm in a small apartment of about 460 square feet, and I'm calling people because people don't want me to come visit while the COVID-19 thing is going on. So we're going to go over some questions and answers, or Q&A, at the very end, the last 20 minutes or so, and so it's going to be a total of about 50 minutes. So first we're going to learn about suicide awareness, as well as understanding some of the signs, symptoms, and what we can do. Then we'll go into what we call cabin fever, which is not an official psychological term, but it's something that's very real, and you are probably experiencing at least a little bit of it right now. Then we'll get into a short bit on environmental challenges, which will lead us into the question and answer period when we discuss your environmental challenges, and hopefully some of y'all can bring some good advice to the table from what your experiences have already been. My children are in their mid-20s to mid-30s, so I don't have any experience with dealing with children during this time, and I realize that many of you probably do. So when it comes to suicide awareness and prevention, what we need to do, what we need to know, how we need to present what we do, and how we can see it in other people are very important pieces. Now, ACE is a term that we use in the Army for suicide prevention. I believe other branches may use it as well in the U.S. Army and U.S. military. ACE stands for Ask, Care, and Escort. It's easy to remember, at least in English. I'm not sure how that translates to French, Portuguese, and Spanish, but ask, care, and escort. And as you can see on the card there, you ask, have the courage to ask the question, calmly and directly. We'll get to the steps on getting to that point, but you want to be direct, even if it's not culturally appropriate, typically, in your language or culture, to ask somebody, are you thinking about killing yourself? That's where you want to get to. If you still feel through conversation and through signs and symptoms that somebody is potentially suicidal. Then you also want to care for your buddy. That's the C part of this. Care for them. Ask them questions. Don't use force. Actively listen, and we'll go over that a little bit more in a little bit here. And remove any means by which they could or are considering doing the suicide. Nowadays, in psychological circles, it's no longer appropriate, at least in English, to say committing suicide. We call it suiciding. So that way it's not seen as a crime. So never leave them alone once you've established that they are intending to commit suicide or thinking strongly about it. Escort them wherever they need to go. If in this particular circumstance, we're going to have to make quite a few modifications because of COVID-19 or the coronavirus. So what you'll probably consider is keep them on the phone. If you have to, call 911 if they're not willing to get themselves to a hospital or get themselves on a suicide line themselves, with possibly, if at all possible, you on another phone line. But obviously we're going to have to make some modifications. So in the Army, the U.S. Army Chaplain Corps, our alternate motto is Semper Gumby. I don't know if you remember that cartoon character, but it was a flexible rubber man, blue man, back in the 60s and 70s. His name was Gumby, and Semper, obviously from siempre, semper in Latin, means always. So always flexible. So please keep that in mind. Always be flexible, especially with this COVID thing, as to how you're going to apply without putting yourself in danger physiologically or those that you're trying to help. So the risk factors, they'll be on the next slide. It's, failed relationships is on the top of that for a reason. I don't recall one time that I have dealt with a suicidal soldier or family member that was not in a failed or a former relationship that had failed or expectations weren't really bad. That has always been the key tie-in. There are all these other aspects to it, like the family history of suicide, poor suicide or prior suicide attempt, poor social skills, psychological disorders, that particularly depression, drug and alcohol abuse, financial stress. You can read it, getting in trouble with the law, and whether or not they have access to lethal means. The main thing that I key in on is, are they happy with who they are in regard to romance? Some people are sworn to celibacy. A lot of my Catholic priest colleagues are, some nuns, some other folks that I know. If they're happy with that, this is probably not going to be an issue to discuss with them. However, with most folks, they either want to be in a relationship, they're in a miserable relationship, they're in a happy relationship, or they just exited a relationship and they're grieving. So please keep this in mind. There's probably nothing else statistically that can hurt a person more than infidelity and a broken relationship. So here are the protective factors. Do they have good friends, good family, good support system that treat them well? Do they have health care? Can they take care of things, mentally and physically with help? And with some people, that's just not available. Coping ability. Do they handle stressors very well in their normal life, in their professional life? Many times we know each other just from being in school together, or being at work together a lot, or being at home a lot. And obviously, from a chaplain perspective, you can take this or leave it. That's on you. But faith, trust in God. Having group activities. Now, we have quite a technological generation right now, where people talk to each other way more on phones and the computer than they did previously. So that's not as big of an obstacle as this would have been 20 or 30 years ago. However, it's important that if you're isolated because of COVID, that you have communication with other people. And whether or not, somebody is willing to go get help, and if they have good values. Values are important. So here are the warning signs. Already discussed them, but you want to watch out for, are they pulling back? Are they acting differently? If you hear them say words that mean hopeless, helpless, those are really key contributors to suicidal ideation. So that's when you definitely need to move into asking questions. Financial and legal problems can obviously cause people to get into some great depression, particularly if they don't have good resiliency skills. Relationship, we've mentioned the other things. So as you'll notice on this screen, there are 4 steps or levels to getting to the real question, number 4 there. But first, you just want to ask nice small talk conversations just so you can kind of get a read on them. And if they still seem upset, even though you've asked them to talk about their own personal things, like things they love, people they love, etc., and they seem to blow that off, then it's probably time to start asking what's wrong with them, and actively listening. Also, then you move into 3, where what can I do to help you? And if they start pushing back some more and they don't admit that they are feeling suicidal, then I would ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? Don't say, you're not thinking about killing yourself. Ask it directly. Are you thinking about killing yourself? And then here is the care piece. Once you've established that they are thinking about killing themselves, even if they are in a different physical location, make sure that you stress to them that they are not alone, that you care for them, that you want to be there for them emotionally. I mean, that might not be the correct wording for that particular person, depending on how macho they are, or because some cultures, people aren't, especially males, are not allowed to express their feelings other than anger. So you get into put it on you for starters there in level 2. Whoops. You'll see, I may not understand exactly how you feel, but I do care. So basically, you're starting off with I, instead of saying, I know exactly how you feel. No, start it off with something meaningful that doesn't make them mad at you. Like, I don't exactly understand this, but I do care and I want to help. I made the terrible mistake of telling somebody who was in a crisis that I knew exactly how they felt when I was in my late 30s. And they almost took my head off. Okay, that was figuratively, but it was a bad day for me. So just remember, don't tell people you know exactly how they feel. And then work on, let me make sure I understand. So let them clarify. Kind of lead the question, but let them own it. Because if they don't own it, it's going to feel more like you're pressuring them to come to a conclusion. You want them to own exactly what they need to do in their care plan after they've admitted that they feel suicidal. So if you're on the phone, like I said earlier, please don't hang up. Tell them that you want to help. Don't be mean to them. Don't be harsh. Don't be judgmental. Be caring. Even if you're normally kind of a hard person, tone it down for the situation, please. Okay, so active listening is an important piece in working with somebody through getting suicidal assistance or intervention. You want to face the person. You want to make eye contact with them if you're in person, or even if you're on a computer screen with them or your phone screen. Try to look at the camera lens so that they know that you're really there and you're concerned. Don't think about how you can adjust the conversation to tell them your own story. Focus on their story so that they will feel respected. A lot of times people don't feel respected and they feel like nobody cares, and that's why they're in a situation like this. So you want to reflect back to what they're saying, not what you're thinking, but do it in your own words, please. So for instance, if someone were to come to me and say, so tell me, what is the problem? And I said, I'm in desperate financial straits. I'm in a very difficult financial situation. It would probably be best for them to say, I hear you saying that you're having financial problems and it's really hard for you. So you put it in different words. You're using the same thoughts, using a few different words, and that way they know that you've taken the time to metabolize it through your brain, your heart, however you want to look at it, and you actually care about what they're saying. You're not just mimicking back to them exactly word for word what they just said. So on the escort piece, this is the third part of ACE. So ask, care, and escort. Do not leave them alone, as I've said before. Try to get them to an emergency department if at all possible. If this situation that we're in right now becomes too difficult to do that, I would try to get them on the phone with professionals in suicidal ideation. Somebody who can talk to them and just make sure that you remain in contact with them. If you lose contact with them, I recommend that you call 911 and have the professionals come and escort them from their home. But try not to let it go there because they may be bitter at you for that later. But if it's needed to save their life, please, by all means. If they won't go, that's where you have to call. And if you're on the phone, keep them talking. So there's a stigma about this sort of thing, as I mentioned earlier, particularly in my culture. Most men are not regularly avid about speaking about their emotions. I mean, they're pretty tight-hold with their thoughts, with their feelings, especially if it's not anger or happiness. Everything else is kind of off limits except for those who they really trust. So try to be that person that they really trust, in order to make it an environment from here on out, whether it be in your apartment or your house right now where you're stuck there doing homeschool and you're, okay, I shouldn't say stuck there, but you're in your household and you're working on a computer and you possibly have kids and a spouse. And so you've got all these other things that you're not used to. Please make it an environment of love, concern, and mutual respect, so that there won't be a stigma, so that there won't be some kind of mockery that might occur when somebody brings up the fact that they are feeling suicidal. So you're setting an environment now, proactively, ahead of time. So get yourself some help if you need it too, and offer it. Try to maintain a good climate. And please be open to talk about mental health issues, spiritual issues. Talk about it in whatever language you and your loved ones or those who you're cohabitating with feel comfortable with. Preferably, I would hope, your loved ones. Okay, so here are some resources. And the two biggest ones to consider would probably be 911 for emergency services anywhere here in Virginia, Maryland, DC, anywhere else in the United States. Typically, 911 is the number to call for police or fire or an ambulance, a medical ambulance to come and take somebody away. There is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. You can look that up on your phone. And there are a lot of other websites here that are strictly or primarily geared toward the military. And so that's not as important. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline is also right here. CONUS means Continental United States. So there it is. If you happen to live in Europe, there you go. But Continental US, if you want to call them, you can call them from anywhere in the world if you can make that phone call. I'm assuming that they have criteria on who they can talk to. So if you can't get help with them, you might want to start developing a language list of suicide crisis numbers right now that is appropriate for you and your loved ones. So that pretty well summarizes the suicide prevention in a nutshell. Now we're moving on to cabin fever, awareness and response. So cabin fever is a play on words here. Cabin being a small house out in the wilderness, typically. People get snowed in, and that's where they got the word cabin. And fever is sickness when you're not feeling right about something. Somebody gets a high temperature, it's a fever. Okay, so cabin fever. It can also be called going stir crazy. People get that in prison cells. I worked behind bars when I was in Bible college and seminary, and I'm very familiar with how it can really stir people up if they don't start focusing and figuring out ways to cope. So cabin fever is typically in the winter months. It's the highest state in the United States for cabin fever is Alaska for obvious reasons. It's cold and they have really long nights in the winter or long days, I can't remember. But it's really an awkward season. It's extremely cold outside, so it's not easy to go out and play. So what do we look for? How can we help? How can we help ourselves? How can we help others? So I mentioned before, it's not really a psychological term. It's not a mental illness, psychological illness, but it is a real thing. And it is closely related to SAD, or the seasonal affective disorder, also called seasonal depression, that we're kind of alluding to here as well. It's also closely related to, if you've ever seen any movies or read books from the late 1800s in Western United States and Western Canada, in the prairies where the wind is always going, you have these gigantic ranches that people lived on and were settling on. They were extremely far from their neighbors because it takes 100 times more grass to feed cows in the West than it does where it's fertile and green. And so people started getting what they called prairie madness. Now, madness is not a term that we use for going crazy anymore, but it means a mental health issue having to do with the affect of living in the prairie. So the definition is right there. It's basically about getting irritable, restless, or other emotional issues from living in isolation or from not being able to get out and being confined in a small place. So that's what we're going to work on. Here's how we recognize it. Please read the screen. You'll notice on the bottom the two words, whoa, wrong button. The two words here, hopelessness and worthlessness, can also tie into suicidal ideations or thoughts. So depression. Are they being irritable? Are you being irritable? Maybe you could self-diagnose and decide whether or not you need help, at least on the phone, or start reading up on it. A lot of times when people are sitting around too much and they're not exercising, they feel like they need more energy, and instead of drinking more water, they eat too many carbs, which can also lead to discouragement. I've been pretty good at that myself. Undereating is another factor when somebody is depressed or discouraged. Some people like to eat. Others will eat less and they start losing weight and energy. Insomnia is a fancy word for not being able to sleep as well as you would like to. Some people just keep on sleeping. They want to take naps. They just don't want to get out of bed. They're not motivated. Distrust, paranoia, hopelessness, as we mentioned, suicidal ideations. This can be tied in. And that's why we're bringing up cabin fever. That's one of the reasons. And also different ways so that you all can get along in a confined space with limited resources, with multiple people especially. So, pardon me, loss of interest. Somebody or yourself starts losing interest in things that you would normally do indoors. This might be a sign. Morning nausea, getting sick in the morning, feeling sick to your stomach. Social withdrawal. Somebody's typically an extrovert. You know, some people are socially withdrawn all the time. Others are extroverts. They're excited. They like being around people. They get their energy from being around people. And if they have social withdrawal, that's a sign. They don't want to be talking to people as much as normal, etc. Having trouble concentrating, focusing on things. This can be another sign. And then decision making. If decision making becomes a problem, that can just be a sign of distress. If somebody's stressed too much, you know how it is. All of us have experienced that. Something major comes our way, and then all of a sudden we're required to make some decisions. And oftentimes it's difficult to make a decision, especially if it doesn't have anything to do with what's distressing you in the first place. So difficulty concentrating because you're focusing on what's distressing you. Decreased libido. This means lowered sex drive. If you typically have a high sex drive, that might be an issue, particularly if you're married. So, I'll leave that alone. Lack of energy. That comes in with the lethargy that we were talking about that could come from lack of food or thinking you need too much food. Moving right along. So try to keep your routines as much as possible. Whatever you do normally, if you can do it in your place of residence, please do it and try to keep it in the same time zones. Try to do your work when you would normally work, or figure out new work times that work for everybody in the house so that you can all share a couple of computers, or so that kids can do homework and you can do your homework now that you're homeschooling, or doing distance learning. I did distance learning Air War College, and it was a rough 2 years. So I feel for you. However, right now, that's what you got to focus on. The biggest challenges are probably going to be if you have children, I would assume. So that's when you really have to start scheduling who does what, where in the house, at what times. Do work times, set aside homework times. Try to lay this out, even on paper. Even if you change the paper next week, try to lay out a contract with those you live with on where you're going to be at certain times of the day within your confines of your residence, and also what you're going to do during those times. Set aside time for hobby. If you have a hobby you can do in your house, wonderful. If you don't, try to figure something out online. And we'll give you quite a few references at the tail end of this part of the brief. Physical exercise. I'm also going to give you a couple of, there's a Google page that I looked up with lots of apps for physical exercise. 2 of them, which I do myself. I actually do physical training in my apartment every morning. That way I don't have to come back and wash up and change. You can run in place if you have no exercise equipment, but there are lots of body weight routines you can do. Make sure that you spend time focusing on children if you have them, and please, by all means, don't drop the romance in marriage. Be kind to one another. Typically, you have to be kind all day for it to be romantic. It's not just it's time to be romantic, I'm going to be nice now. Typically, love and respect is important all day long. So how do we respond? We've worked on some of this already. So work on that list. Get that list going, even if you have to change it every once in a while as you come to agreements. It's just like being at work. Sometimes you have to change the meeting schedule. Sometimes you have to change the agenda on a meeting. But have some sort of written routine that you can all look at if there are multiple people. And then also, please, during the daylight hours, if somebody doesn't like to be in darkness, please keep the windows open and turn the lights on. Watch some outdoor documentaries when it's time to have fun time. You know, not the whole time, because you also need to do some activities that keep you moving and thinking. But if you are going to watch television, movies, videos, etc., please watch some outdoorsy stuff. If you love the outdoors, you probably want to watch some documentaries on nature so you can feel like you're there. I recommend watching tiny house videos, but I'm an RVer. You want to not feel sorry for yourself about your small apartment, watch a tiny house video. They're living in about a fourth of what I'm living in my studio apartment. And somehow they make it work with children sometimes. So, I mean, and it's kind of fun just to see how small people can live. All over the world, people are getting into tiny houses. They're like, some of them are like 80 square feet for a family. It's just amazing to me. Watching camping videos. I mentioned, please be nice to each other. And here's part of the motto that we say in my office every day because of my current command chaplain, Chaplain Colonel Jay Johns, as we say, take the mission seriously, don't take yourself seriously. Too often we take ourselves too seriously, and then we become abrasive unnecessarily, and we set a tone that doesn't really need to be there. Sometimes it has to happen, but most of the time we just need to relax a bit so that we can have a good atmosphere. Keep doing your routines, but please don't fill up the day too much that you skip some of the routines. It's good to have discipline. Here's one routine that I found interesting. Experts recommend keeping your daily rituals even while working at home. Obviously, he takes the metro or the bus to work. So practice hygiene. Now, you're going to say, Chaplain, why are you telling us about hygiene? Well, first, I am a medical chaplain. I'm a hospital chaplain. And so it's just kind of nasty to not be thinking about hygiene, especially while we've got this pandemic going on of COVID. So please clean well, wash your hands with hot water if possible for at least 20 seconds, sing the alphabet song if you have one in your language. Don't lick your fingers. If you have to touch your face, wash your hands before and after you touch your face. Sanitize doorknobs, faucets, and surfaces. And make sure that you're careful about preparation of food, storage of food, and when you go to the store, please try to maintain social distancing because that's how we get our food. I would recommend using gloves outdoors, but then think about where you're touching the gloves afterwards. Pump gas, clean your hands, please. There you go, pro tip. We should have been washing our hands all along. So how do we respond to it? Okay. Yes, sir. We're going to take a break for a moment.
We'll be taking our break now, and then we will resume at 3:45 and then begin our Q&A. We ask you to please type your questions in English or Spanish in our chat room. Thank you.
Very well, we're gonna keep going with his presentation.
Slide a little bit more briefly, and basically, I'm not trying to instigate fights in your home. I am saying that you should all encourage each other to use as much hygiene as possible, particularly when you leave your domain where you're living. So please just be cautious. Be cautious with your fingers. What have they touched last? Some of the dirtiest places that you can touch are like toilet levers and buttons and doorknobs. So just keep that in mind. So we've hit on that enough, I suppose. You're probably hearing it all the time and reading it on the internet. But I agree with this sign here. I've always kind of been a little bit hypersensitive to not spreading disease, probably because I've worked in hospitals and around patients a lot. So this is how we respond. We get, you know, we've looked at some of the things that we need to do, some of the things that we need to be aware of, but let's bring it where the rubber meets the road, where we really get into the nitty-gritty here. Like I said, we'll try to have set times for everything, but that includes eating too. You should probably try to eat at certain times, because if you get your eating schedule off, it can mess your sleep schedule up. It can mess a lot of things up, and it can wreak havoc on your immune system and your ability to accomplish other tasks. Please avoid sweets, particularly processed sugar, because it weakens your immune system astronomically. I would avoid processed wheat if possible. You might have a whole refrigerator and cabinet full of, or a pantry full of processed foods, and so I'm not saying throw it all out, but I would recommend not buying so much of it in the future. And then talk with those that you live with about where everybody's going to be at certain times of the day. Talk to each other just so that you know, if you're living with people, or if you're talking to people who also live alone, or other people that you know that are living with other people and you're by yourself, talk with other people. It's important to talk. But it's especially important to discuss what you're going to do within your quarters when you're living with other people. And so you're going to set these goals on what everybody's going to do at certain times of the day, as I've suggested, but you're also going to focus on making sure that you can change them and that everybody's in agreement, at least to a degree. It's not as easy as it looks, working from home. It's not as easy as it looks, especially if you're doing homework and all of a sudden your children are doing homeschool and they were not before. This can be really challenging, and you've got this work college, the senior staff college, master's degree that you're working on, and you want to make sure that it counts. So everything here that we're talking about comes into play and is important. So instead of getting bored in your spare time, if you have spare time, I would recommend focusing on some fun stuff that doesn't use the intellectual parts of your brain, like watching movies or playing video games, but also shifting to include your children, if you have children, shifting to having them read, or watching something that you can learn from, like a documentary, or discussing or playing games, getting board games, getting games that require more than just motion on the internet. There are plenty of games that require you to intellectually facilitate the game or interact with the game. So help others on the phone, as I mentioned earlier. But the bottom line is you want to balance all these things. Because if you get a little too much of this or a little too much of that and not enough of the other, you can go from distress to eustress to astress. Distress is when you're really undergoing a lot of stress. Eustress is when you're kind of in the middle, and astress, and things are good. You're using the stress to your benefit. You can do this for quite a period of time because you feel good about it. Like when you're in the zone at work, when you're doing the right thing at the gym, that sort of thing, even though you're not going to the gym now. Astress is about boredom. So you want to kind of get the balance and try to keep it into the eustress zone as much as possible. It's like euphoria. Astress is about boredom, like asexual animals, like worms. It's kind of boring. Okay, that was a bad analogy. But eustress, euphoria, you think of a great place to live. That would be where you want to stay, where you've got enough stress to keep you occupied and you're not bored, not enough boredom, and you're in the middle. Here's a picture of what some of you all might be going through right now. But this is how you can respond. Get the windows open, like in this picture. Take time, if you have little children, to read to them. If you have older children, try to get them to read. You can always keep them from being able to do other things they want to do until they have read for a substantial period of time. So you've got that. And God bless you on that one. So take time to laugh. Make sure you cry if you feel like crying. Don't hold it in, because then it'll probably turn into anger, resentment, harsh behaviors, treating people badly. If you have to, and you feel like screaming, go into your room, put your head in a pillow and scream into the pillow so you don't freak the neighbors out. But sometimes, you have to get some energy out. If you have a punching bag, punch the punching bag. If you need to just do some air boxing in your living room to get out some energy, go for it. So I would also recommend studying meaningful writings. For me, what you read is up to you, but for me, it's the Bible every day. And then reading other powerfully truth-filled books that are inspiring is good, and it'll, feed your soul. Learn a language. The last 60 days, I've been doing Pimsleur Spanish. Es difícil, pero I make time for it every day for 30 minutes, every day. And sometimes I'll just do that on my stationary bicycle. Some of you may have a stationary bicycle. Or sometimes I'll just pace the floor and put on my headset and go back and forth in my apartment while I'm walking back and forth. Please limit your caffeine, especially if you're hypersensitive like I am, because that can set you into insomnia or a lack of sleep. It can mess up your sleep schedule, which can, especially if you cohabitate with other people, can really mess the household schedule up. So please, if you're susceptible, if you're not like my wife where she can drink a cup of coffee and go right to sleep, and you're like me, if you drink one afternoon, or if you drink a soda or anything with caffeine in it, tea, afternoon, you're up all night, don't do it. Just don't pull the trigger, it's dangerous. I don't know if that analogy will work in all three of the other languages. So another thing is to keep in mind that alcohol is a depressant. So if you're becoming depressed, or if you're potentially going to be depressed, please limit or don't drink alcohol at all. I realize that some of you have children at home, and it would be a nice way to feel a little bit better about your situation. However, don't use it in a self-medicating fashion if you can at all help yourself. Practicing slow, deep breathing is important. I remember one time when a vehicle had a really bad crisis, and I'm not going to describe it because we might have children. We probably have children watching. But there were some really stressed out people in Iraq when I was there. And I came after the scene, and there were a couple of guys who were just, what just happened? They're sitting there. And then this guy comes up in a vehicle wanting to get out the gate. He didn't know what just happened, and he got all angry, and he was yelling at me from up above the vehicle. And he didn't realize that something bad had just happened. And so I had just remembered being in a class with a psychologist where she told us to take deep breaths in through the nose, hold it for a couple of seconds, and out through the mouth. And you would be shocked at how quickly my adrenaline decreased, how quickly I was able to maintain control, stability of mind, and get out of that fight or flight mode where I was able to actually think coherently and not reactively. So please, if things are getting on your nerves, do several breaths of in through the nose, hold it for a sec, out through the mouth. And if you don't remember that, just remember slow breathing. So we can overcome obstacles, as you can see on the PowerPoint picture here. Sometimes we just have to help each other. And we need to work as a team. I mean, most of you are senior leaders in the military or other forms of first responders, I would assume, and you are expected to understand team dynamics. But when it comes to our own households, sometimes it can get a little bit confusing, particularly if you're in a small environment. Please remember that you're a member of a team, even if you're the leader. This is a play on a game, on a movie, I Am Legend. Sometimes it's a little scary going to the store. You have to really watch your P's and Q's. You have to make sure that you're staying an appropriate distance away from people and not touching things. Try to wear gloves, etc., like I hit on earlier. Even the adults get to homeschool right now. Yippee! So here are some activities or some links that will present activities. Like I mentioned, this one here, Major General Taylor recommended. This one here I found as I was searching, and it has tons of stuff on what to do to eliminate boredom for different age groups, etc. This particular link was a search that has all kinds of apps for your computer or your phone on how to do exercise routines, which will increase over the weeks. So what you do is you just stick with one routine for 1 to 3 weeks, and then each body part each day, and keep moving. And a lot of these, I lifted weights from 1979 until 2018 when I had a double hernia surgery, and now I just do body weight stuff. And body weight stuff is pretty amazing. I mean, I don't get as big as I used to, but it's amazing what a great workout you can get. I really got nauseous when I was nauseated when I was working out this morning in my apartment doing legs with my body weight. Okay, so you can really get a good workout at home is what I'm saying without any kind of equipment. These are some more things for people to do to combat the boredom. And then also this particular one, I believe this one had all sorts of links on how to help with math with different age groups and science, etc. So you can get some tutoring if you're having trouble with your children. Now, this may not be, some of these actually have links for Spanish. I don't know about Portuguese and French. I'm assuming that you can find other equivalents from Portuguese and French-speaking countries. So we're dealing with environmental changes. I've been hitting on this pretty much the whole presentation. But IADC staff, students, and family members, especially the family members and the students, are far from home. And they are, and many of you are stuck in a smaller place maybe than you're used to. And many of you have language challenges when you do go to the store. That can be kind of stressful. And we've hit on all of this with the children and everything. So what do you do? I'm asking you to think of ideas. If you speak Spanish, please text or email. Is it an email? Colonel Gutierrez? Okay, Colonel. All right, text Colonel Gutierrez, por favor, and or email him, and so that we can have some questions. But I'd also like to hear from some of you that have gotten some good ideas on how some things that I haven't thought of, that I haven't brought up in the cabin fever aspect, and hygiene, and how to supply your home, etc., safely or relatively safely. I'd really like to hear at this time. So we're going to open this up to questions and answers at this point. If you don't speak Spanish, you speak French or Portuguese, feel free to speak through the interpreters to me.
So the first question is in English.
Any advice for those that experiencing a sense of loss and are living this situation as a grieving process?
Yes, that's a really good point. Grieving is part of depression. When you're depressed, you're actually grieving. And there are 5 stages according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in depression. And I'm not sure I'm going to be able to rattle them off by memory right now because I usually have them written down. However, you're going to have anger, denial. You'll go from phase to phase. Something's going on here. I think I need to get away from the mic.
Yes, please.
Okay. You'll go from phase to phase. There, anger, depression, denial, making deals with God, bartering with God, sadness, deep sadness. I think I just hit all 5. But yes, and if you are having difficulty and you speak English or even Spanish, I can try to talk to you on the phone, but my phone number is available to anyone who wants to speak to a chaplain who speaks English. And my phone number is 307-256-2482. It is in the slideshow. You'll be able to find it in there too. That's my personal cell phone, so please be kind to me depending on your time zone. And, if it's Sunday morning, I'll probably be doing an online church service. During the day, I do have a few appointments, but I'll get back to you if I can. Now, if it's an international call, I'm not sure how we'll do that, but please recommend a free app that I can use to call back. Next question, please. Oh, I hope that answered the question. Do we know that? Or?
So Miriam, did he answer your question? So moving on to the second question. Actually, there are two questions here, and it's also in English.
Challenge is living completely alone, especially in a foreign country, and when your only source is of human contact was work or school. So you have some tips for those persons, and do you have some advice for those that are afraid to be sick alone?
Afraid to what?
To be sick alone.
Oh, right. Now that's a good question. I don't even know that I have the answer to that. Let me think on that second question. I'm assuming that you're sick, or you're thinking that if you were to get sick, this could be a real challenge, especially if you're alone. I would recommend staying in contact with people that you love, people who care about you, whether it be on the teléfono, on the phone or on the computer, so that you can, have people checking in on you, knowing your status, etc. Also, I would recommend checking in with the schools periodically if there's a system for that, so that they know how you're doing on a day-to-day basis. The second question, what if you're sick and you don't want to be alone? If it gets really bad, I would call 911 or drive yourself to a hospital. Put in on Google Maps in Spanish that you want to get to the nearest hospital, and it'll take you there if you can drive. Obviously, the metro is not something that we're doing now. So if you need help, I would call somebody to help too. And, obviously somebody can mask up if they have to. And I don't know if that's safe with social distancing, but if you're sick enough, I'm sure we can make exceptions. I don't want to say that legally, but at least get an ambulance where they're masked up and they've got all the proper protective gear if you have medical insurance.
So Miriam says that, yes, it's a generic way. If there's a situation, this type of situation that happens, what could we do in this case? Oh, I was talking about the first question that we already asked you, so it's already covered. Yeah.
I guess we're covered. If you have further, please email back and I'll try to help out.
Yes, dear Chaplain Wolf, thank you so much for the leadership and for the IADC and the students of class 59. Here they will shout La Mejor. Normally that's why they would be shouting if they were here. But the staff and our families would really like to thank you for sharing these words. They were very reconforting, and also thank you for your advice to carry on with the situation. We know that if we work together, we will achieve this and we will overcome this and manage to keep going and to go back to our normal lives.
As you can see, I'm honored to do this. I like teaching. This has been a difficult map to navigate, though. just because we've never been here with something like this, a pandemic, not in my lifetime, and I'm almost 55. So, my honor. Are there any more questions? Okay. This concludes, and oh, by the way, my email address should be coming up here. Here are the references that I used. I meant to have that up while we're doing the questions and answers. That's my personal cell phone number. I can also give you my email address. I don't know how much help I can give to folks who aren't in school here, or at least their families. We have one question. Oh, we got one more question.
Oh yes, I have one question from Catherine Almeida. How can we lower the anxiety in children and in elderly people because of this lack of this uncertainty that is everywhere?
Right? And this is not a religious briefing. For me, I would go to God. I mean, it's things like this crises can really bring us to a pivotal point in our life. Do you decide for more faith? Which literally, faith equals trust. Faith basically means trust. So if you don't want to go that way, I've got to offer you an option. I would recommend deep breathing techniques, reading things that make you happy, etc. But I think this is a great time also for those of us who have maybe been off the wagon, so to speak, or not practicing our faith, to turn to the Lord with everything we have. I hope that answered your question.
So, Catherine, does this answer your question? Oh, there is a delay of 30 seconds, so maybe it takes 30 seconds for them to answer. That's the problem.
My email address is Todd, Todd, .m as in Mike, .wolf, right there, 4 letters, WOLF, .mil, which is MIL, short for military, at mail, MIAL, like email, .mil. Again, so it's redundant. You have mil at mail.mil. Okay, are we prepared?
Catherine is very thankful to you. Thank you for your answer. And with this, we have finished this presentation. Thank you so much for your presentation and for your time, Mr. Chaplain Wolf. And now everybody's leaving this room. Thank you for your assistance. Thank you. Bye.